A wealthy woman called the police on an elderly black man for stealing a Ferrari, seconds before discovering he was the father of the billionaire who owned it. A luxury shopping plaza in Naples, Florida. A bright red Ferrari. A crowd of strangers. And one accusation that would change multiple lives forever. When Victoria Sterling pointed at an elderly black man and called the police, she was certain she knew exactly who he was. To her, Samuel Carter looked like someone who didn't belong near a car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But what Victoria didn't know was that the quiet man holding a paper bag full of food for the needy wasn't a thief, wasn't a criminal, and wasn't afraid, because hidden behind his humble appearance was a truth so powerful that it would bring a billionaire across the country, expose years of painful prejudice, and remind an entire nation that a person's value can never be measured by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the assumptions others make about them. "Sir, step away from that Ferrari right now." The voice cut through the warm Florida afternoon like a knife through glass. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The sound of shopping bags rustling faded into silence. Outside the upscale waterside plaza in Naples, Florida, a crowd began gathering near the front entrance. Luxury stores lined both sides of the palm tree-covered promenade. Sunlight reflected off polished windows. A fountain sparkled in the center courtyard. Everything looked peaceful. Until Victoria Sterling started shouting. She stood near the curb in a cream-colored designer suit, one manicured hand pointing across the parking area. At the center of her accusation stood an elderly black man. Samuel Carter, 72 years old, gray hair, weathered hands, a faded blue button-down shirt, worn brown shoes, and in one hand a simple paper bag carrying meals from a community kitchen. The image didn't fit the setting. Not to Victoria. Not to many of the people watching. And certainly not to the story already forming inside their heads. "Someone call security!" Victoria shouted. "That man is trying to steal that car!" Several people immediately turned toward the vehicle. A bright red Ferrari sat parked near the entrance. Its paint gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. Its value was probably more than most houses in the neighborhood Samuel lived in. A few shoppers pulled out their phones. Others stepped closer. The crowd always moved toward drama. Samuel simply looked at Victoria. His expression never changed. No anger, no panic, no fear. Just quiet patience. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there seems to be some misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Victoria laughed sharply. The sound carried across the courtyard. "You expect anyone here to believe that Ferrari belongs to you?" A few people exchanged glances. Nobody answered. Nobody defended him. The silence said enough. Samuel lowered his eyes briefly toward the paper bag in his hand. Inside were sandwiches left over from the community kitchen. He had planned to deliver them to a shelter on his way home. Now he stood surrounded by strangers staring at him like he had done something wrong. The old feeling returned. The one he thought he'd learned to live with years ago. The feeling of being judged before speaking, of being measured before being known. Victoria stepped closer. "You should leave before security gets here." Samuel looked at the Ferrari, then back at her. "I don't think that will be necessary." The confidence in his voice seemed to irritate her even more. Her face tightened. "You're actually staying?" "I am." "Unbelievable." She immediately pulled out her phone. "Fine. Let's let the police sort it out." Several people in the crowd nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. Most simply watched. Nobody knew Samuel. Nobody knew where he had come from. Nobody knew that he had spent the morning serving meals to strangers. Nobody knew that he often skipped buying things for himself so others could eat. Nobody knew that kindness had become a habit so natural to him that he rarely thought about it anymore. All they saw was an old black man standing next to a Ferrari. And for many of them, that was enough. Victoria dialed 911. Her voice changed instantly. It became softer, more urgent, more frightened. The performance was impressive. "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity," she said. Samuel listened quietly. "There is an elderly man attempting to access a Ferrari outside Waterside Plaza." She paused dramatically. "I don't feel safe." The crowd grew larger. Someone whispered. Someone else started recording video. A teenager near the fountain pointed his phone directly at Samuel. Samuel noticed. He didn't look away. He simply stood there beneath the bright Florida sun, while strangers documented one of the most humiliating moments of his life. Yet somehow he remained calm. That calmness puzzled people. Most expected arguments. Most expected shouting. Most expected excuses. Instead, Samuel waited, almost as if he knew something they didn't. A security guard finally approached. Young, nervous, trying to appear confident. "Sir," he said politely, "can I ask what you're doing here?" "Waiting." "For what?" Samuel smiled faintly. "I suppose we'll find out soon enough." The guard looked confused. Victoria rolled her eyes. "He's stalling." The security guard glanced at the Ferrari, then at Samuel, then back at Victoria. Nobody seemed certain what was actually happening. The only thing everyone agreed on was that something unusual was unfolding. A warm breeze drifted through the courtyard. Palm leaves swayed overhead. Water splashed softly from the fountain. For a strange moment, the world seemed suspended between two different versions of the truth. One version belonged to Victoria. The other belonged to Samuel, and only one of them could survive. Minutes later, distant sirens echoed across the boulevard. The crowd reacted immediately. Phones rose higher. Whispers spread faster. Victoria crossed her arms with visible satisfaction. "There," she said. "Now we'll see." Samuel looked toward the road where flashing lights approached. Not a trace of worry appeared on his face. No trembling hands. No attempt to leave. No desperation. Just quiet acceptance. That calmness unsettled Victoria far more than any argument could have. Because guilty people usually ran. Guilty people usually panicked. Samuel did neither. The police cars turned into the plaza. Blue lights flashed across storefront windows. The crowd parted. The moment had arrived. Yet the most important part of the story hadn't even begun. Because nobody standing in that courtyard knew who Samuel Carter really was. Nobody knew why he wasn't afraid. Nobody knew why a man dressed so simply could stand beside a Ferrari with such quiet confidence. And nobody, not Victoria Sterling, not the crowd, not even the officers stepping out of their patrol cars, could imagine that within the next few hours, everything they believed about this old man would be turned completely upside down. Because Samuel Carter wasn't waiting for someone to save him. He was waiting for the truth to arrive. And when it did, nothing in that parking lot would ever look the same again. But long before the flashing police lights, long before the Ferrari, long before Victoria Sterling pointed her finger and decided who he was, Samuel Carter had already lived through enough judgment to last several lifetimes. That morning had begun like most Saturday mornings in Tampa. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. A pale orange glow stretched across the sky beyond rows of aging duplexes and modest single-story homes. Sprinklers clicked lazily across small front yards. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the humid Florida air. Samuel was already awake. He always was. At 72, his body no longer needed an alarm clock. He sat quietly at a small kitchen table scarred by decades of use. A chipped ceramic mug rested beside him. Steam curled upward from fresh coffee. The house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Old wooden floors that creaked whenever he crossed them. A roof that occasionally leaked during heavy storms. But it was home. And after everything life had taken from him, home was enough. On one wall hung a faded photograph of a younger Samuel standing beside his late wife, Diane. She had been gone for 11 years. Cancer. Fast. Cruel. The kind of loss that never really leaves. Samuel glanced at the picture every morning, not because he enjoyed remembering the pain, because he never wanted to forget the love. "Morning, sweetheart," he said softly. The habit remained, even after all these years. He finished his coffee, washed the cup, put on his worn blue shirt, and headed out. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. An elderly man swept his porch. 2 children waited for a school bus. A woman carried groceries into a small apartment building. Samuel waved to everyone. Everyone waved back. Most people knew him, not because he was important, because he was kind. There was a difference. 20 minutes later, he arrived at New Hope Community Kitchen. The building sat between an old church and a discount grocery store. The paint was peeling. The sign was faded. But every weekend, hundreds of people passed through its doors. Some came because they were hungry. Some came because they were lonely. Some came because they simply needed someone to look them in the eye and remind them they mattered. Samuel understood all three. Inside, volunteers moved between folding tables. The smell of soup filled the room. Fresh bread cooled on metal racks. Coffee brewed in giant silver containers. "Morning, Sam," called Linda Watkins, the kitchen director. She was 65, sharp-witted, and ran the place with military precision. "Morning, Linda. You got here before me again." Samuel smiled. "Barely. You ever think about retiring from volunteering?" "No." "Why not?" He shrugged. "What would I do all day?" Linda laughed. The answer never changed. Samuel spent the next several hours serving meals. He greeted every person exactly the same. The homeless veteran, the struggling single mother, the retired factory worker, the teenager living out of a motel room. No special treatment, no judgment, no pity, just dignity. Around noon, a young volunteer named Brian approached him. Brian couldn't have been older than 20. "Mr. Carter?" "Yeah?" "Can I ask you something?" Samuel handed a tray to an elderly woman before turning back. "Sure." "Why do you do this every week?" Samuel looked around the room. People eating, people talking, people laughing, people surviving. Then he smiled. "Because somebody once did it for me." Brian frowned. "You were homeless?" "For a little while." The young man's eyes widened. Samuel rarely talked about his past. But today, for some reason, he continued. "When I was 23, I lost everything." Brian listened. "My job, my apartment, nearly my hope." "What happened?" Samuel looked out a nearby window. For a moment, he seemed far away. "Life happened." The answer carried more weight than details ever could. Brian nodded quietly. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "The trick is simple." "What's that?" "When somebody helps you stand up." He paused. "You spend the rest of your life helping somebody else." Brian never forgot those words. Neither would the audience watching Samuel's story unfold. By mid-afternoon, the crowd began thinning. Volunteers stacked chairs. Tables were wiped clean. Floors were swept. As always, Samuel stayed behind. As always, he worked until everything was finished. And as always, he refused every attempt to thank him. Linda noticed. She always noticed. "You know," she said while carrying supplies toward storage, "most people your age would be relaxing somewhere." Samuel chuckled. "Sounds boring." "I'm serious." "So am I." She shook her head. "You spend more money on other people than yourself. Money comes and goes. And yet you keep giving." Samuel looked around the empty room. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows. The place suddenly felt peaceful, almost sacred. My mother used to say something. What? If your hands are full of blessings, they should never stay closed. Linda smiled. Smart woman. The smartest. A few minutes later, Samuel carried several leftover meal bags toward his truck. The old pickup had nearly 200,000 miles on it. The paint was faded. The air conditioner only worked when it felt like it. But it still ran. And that was enough. He placed the bags carefully in the passenger seat. Several would go to a nearby shelter. A few would go to people he knew sleeping under bridges. Nothing would be wasted. As he climbed behind the wheel, a familiar feeling settled over him. Contentment. Not happiness. Not excitement. Something deeper. The quiet satisfaction that came from being useful. Many people spend their lives chasing significance. Samuel had found something better. Purpose. The engine rumbled to life. The afternoon sun hung high above the Florida sky. Traffic moved steadily along the boulevard. Palm trees swayed in the warm breeze. He pulled onto the road and began driving toward Naples. He had no idea that before the day ended, his life would collide with someone determined to judge him before knowing him. He had no idea that strangers would question his character, that cameras would follow his every move, that police officers would stand around him, that millions of people would eventually learn his name. At that moment, he was simply an old man delivering food. Nothing more, nothing less. Several miles later, as he approached a quieter stretch of highway, something caught his attention. A silver sedan sat on the shoulder. Its hood was raised. A young woman stood beside it. A little boy sat on the curb nearby. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the worry on her face. And the moment he saw it, he eased his truck onto the shoulder. Because that was who Samuel Carter was. Someone else's problem had a way of becoming his concern. He parked behind the disabled car and turned off the engine. The little boy looked up. The woman wiped tears from her eyes. And neither of them realized that the stranger stepping out of the pickup truck was about to change their lives. Just as they were about to become part of a story far bigger than any of them could imagine. The heat shimmered above the asphalt. Cars rushed past on the highway without slowing down. Most drivers never even glanced toward the stranded silver sedan sitting on the shoulder. But Samuel Carter had always been the kind of man who noticed people, especially the ones everyone else overlooked. He stepped out of his truck and closed the door gently behind him. The young woman looked up immediately. Relief flickered across her face, then embarrassment, then uncertainty. The little boy sitting on the curb tightened his grip around a worn, stuffed dinosaur. Samuel offered a warm smile. "Afternoon." "Hi," the woman replied softly. "You having car trouble?" She laughed nervously. "That obvious?" Samuel glanced at the raised hood. "A little." The boy finally looked up. His cheeks were red from the heat. Samuel crouched slightly so he wouldn't seem intimidating. "Hey there." The boy nodded. "What's your name?" "Tyler." "Well, Tyler, I think your mom and I are going to see if we can figure this thing out." Tyler looked toward the broken car. "Can you fix it?" Samuel smiled. "I don't know yet." It wasn't a promise, it was honesty. And children usually trusted honesty more than promises. The young woman introduced herself. "My name's Emily." "Samuel." She looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Stress seemed woven into every movement. Samuel had seen that look before. Life had given it to him years ago. "How long have you been stuck here?" he asked. "Almost an hour." "You call somebody?" Emily looked away. "Not really." Samuel understood immediately. Calling for help cost money. Tow trucks cost money. Repairs cost money. And sometimes people simply didn't have any left. The silence told him everything. Samuel rolled up his sleeves and leaned over the engine. Years ago, before life took him down 100 unexpected roads, he'd worked maintenance jobs, construction, repairs, mechanical work, enough to learn a few things. He checked the battery. A loose connection. Nothing dramatic. Nothing expensive. Just enough to stop the car. Mind if I try something? Emily blinked. Please. Samuel walked back to his truck. A few moments later, he returned carrying a small toolbox and jumper cables. Tyler watched him with wide eyes. You keep all that in your truck? Samuel chuckled. At my age, you learn to be prepared. 10 minutes later, sweat covered his forehead. The Florida sun showed no mercy. But eventually, the connection tightened into place. Samuel nodded toward the driver's seat. Try it now. Emily climbed in, turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. For a moment, she simply stared, as though she couldn't believe it. Then tears filled her eyes. Oh my God! Tyler jumped to his feet. Mom! It works! His voice echoed across the roadside. Pure joy, the kind adults often forget how to feel. Emily stepped out of the car. I don't know how to thank you. Samuel wiped his hands on a rag. You don't have to. No, seriously. It's okay. She shook her head. You saved me today. Samuel smiled. No. Your car just needed a little help. But Emily knew it was more than that. She had spent the entire morning trying not to panic. Rent was due. Bills were waiting. Her second job started in less than 2 hours. The breakdown felt like one more thing she couldn't survive. Then a stranger stopped. A stranger who didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, didn't ask for anything. And somehow that mattered more than the repair itself. Samuel walked back toward his truck. Then he paused. Has Tyler eaten? Emily hesitated. A second too long. Samuel noticed. Parents rarely lied well when it came to their children. We had breakfast. That's not what I asked. Emily looked embarrassed. No. Samuel nodded slowly. Without another word, he opened the passenger door of his truck. The paper bags from the community kitchen still sat inside. He carried 2 over. Turkey sandwiches. Emily immediately shook her head. Oh no, I couldn't. You can. I don't want to take food from somebody else. Samuel looked at her. That's exactly who it's for. Tyler's eyes never left the sandwiches. Samuel handed one directly to him. The boy accepted it carefully, like someone handing him treasure. Thank you, sir. You're welcome. For a few minutes, they sat beneath the shade of a nearby tree, eating lunch. Traffic rushed past. Palm trees swayed. The world kept moving. Yet somehow the moment felt still, peaceful. Samuel listened while Emily talked. Not because he was curious, because nobody else seemed to listen. She told him about working 2 jobs, about raising Tyler alone, about trying to stay ahead of bills that always seemed faster than she was. She didn't complain. She simply sounded tired. Samuel understood that kind of tired. It wasn't physical. It lived deeper than that. Eventually, she looked at him. What about you? What about me? You spend your Saturday helping strangers. Samuel laughed softly. That's not much of a story. I think it is. He glanced toward the road. The sunlight reflected across passing windshields. For a moment, he thought about telling her everything. The struggles, the losses, the years that nearly broke him. Instead, he simply said, A lot of people helped me when I needed it. Emily smiled. So now you help others, something like that. Tyler finished his sandwich, then pointed toward Samuel's old truck. That's your truck? It is. It's really old. Emily's eyes widened. Tyler! Samuel burst out laughing. It's okay. He's right. The boy grinned. My mom says old things are special. Your mom sounds smart. She is. Emily smiled for the first time. A genuine smile. The kind that hadn't visited her face in a while. Eventually, Samuel checked his watch. He still had deliveries to make. Places to go. People waiting. Well, he said, standing. Looks like you two are back in business. Emily stood too. I wish there was some way I could repay you. There is. Her expression brightened. There is? Sure. What? Samuel pointed toward Tyler. When life gives you the chance to help somebody, don't pass it by. Emily stared at him. The words landed somewhere deep. Because they weren't advice. They were a challenge, a responsibility, a gift. Samuel shook Tyler's hand, then headed back toward his truck. Neither of them noticed him quietly slip something into the pocket of Emily's denim jacket hanging through the open car door. A folded envelope. Nothing more. Nothing less. He never mentioned it. Never pointed it out. Never waited for gratitude. He simply climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove away. Emily watched him disappear down the road. A few minutes later, she reached for her jacket. Something slipped from the pocket. The envelope. Confused, she opened it. Inside sat $300. No note, no name, no explanation. Just cash. Enough to cover groceries. Enough to pay part of the rent. Enough to let her breathe. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then tears rolled down her cheeks. Tyler looked up. Mom? She pressed the envelope against her chest. The old pickup truck had already vanished beyond the curve of the highway. Nothing, sweetheart. Her voice trembled. Just, somebody reminded me there are still good people in the world. Miles away, Samuel continued driving toward Naples. The radio played softly. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the road. He never thought about the money again. He never expected to see Emily again. He certainly never imagined that before this day was over, the kindness he had shown on a lonely roadside would return to him in a way neither of them could possibly imagine. Because while Samuel was heading toward a simple afternoon errand, fate was quietly steering him toward the parking lot where a red Ferrari waited, and where a woman named Victoria Sterling was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Victoria Sterling loved appearances. She loved polished marble floors. She loved luxury handbags. She loved invitation-only charity galas where photographers stood near the entrance and guests greeted each other with practiced smiles. Most of all, she loved being recognized. At 58 years old, Victoria had spent decades building a reputation throughout Naples society. Her husband, Richard Sterling, owned a successful real estate development company. Their home overlooked the Gulf. Their social calendar stayed full year-round. To most people, Victoria looked like the definition of success. Elegant, confident, influential. But people who knew her well understood something different. Victoria didn't simply enjoy status. She measured human worth by it. The way someone dressed, the car they drove, the neighborhood they lived in, the names they knew. Those things mattered to her far more than character. She would never admit it aloud. But she believed it. Deeply. That Saturday afternoon, Victoria had spent nearly 3 hours shopping with 2 longtime friends. The air-conditioned luxury stores offered a welcome escape from the Florida heat. Designer perfumes drifted through polished hallways. Soft music floated from hidden speakers. The women moved from store to store carrying branded shopping bags, talking, laughing, judging, mostly judging. As they walked toward the outdoor plaza, one of her friends pointed toward a young couple sitting on a bench. They look happy. Victoria glanced over, They look broke. Her friends laughed. The remark came so naturally that she barely thought about it. That was how she saw the world. Categories, ranks, winners, losers, people who belonged, people who didn't. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften as they exited the final boutique. Golden light reflected across storefront windows. Palm trees swayed above the courtyard. A violinist performed near the fountain. For a brief moment, everything looked like a postcard. Then Victoria saw the Ferrari. The bright red car sat near the entrance exactly where it had been parked earlier. Even among luxury vehicles, it attracted attention. People glanced at it as they walked by. Some admired it. Others took photos. Victoria noticed something else. An elderly black man walking toward it. Samuel Carter. At that moment, she knew absolutely nothing about him. Nothing. Not his name, not his story, not the food deliveries in his truck, not the years he spent helping strangers, not the son who lived hundreds of miles away. Nothing. Yet within seconds, she had already reached a conclusion. The conclusion felt automatic, effortless, dangerously easy. Her eyes moved from Samuel's worn shoes to his faded shirt, then toward the Ferrari. The image didn't fit the assumptions inside her mind, and rather than question the assumptions, she questioned the man. "Who's that?" one of her friends asked. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "I don't know." Samuel continued walking. Calm, unhurried, carrying the paper bag from the community kitchen. The bag alone seemed to bother Victoria. It looked too ordinary, too out of place, too real. She watched him reach into his pocket. The Ferrari's lights blinked once, then twice. A normal person might have accepted the obvious explanation. Victoria didn't. Instead, she felt something strange, a certainty, the kind that appears when prejudice disguises itself as intuition. "He must have found the keys somehow," she muttered. Her friends looked uncertain. "What do you mean? Look at him." One friend shifted uncomfortably. "What about him?" Victoria didn't answer directly, because saying it aloud would reveal more than she intended. Instead, she said, "That car doesn't belong to someone like that. Someone like that." The words lingered. Neither friend responded. They didn't entirely agree, but they didn't challenge her either. Silence often becomes permission. Victoria stepped forward. Samuel had nearly reached the driver's side door. The late afternoon sun reflected across the Ferrari's glossy paint. He looked down briefly at the vehicle. Not with pride, not with ownership, more with amusement, as if expensive things had never impressed him very much. Victoria mistook the expression entirely, and once she did, every detail afterward became evidence supporting the story she had already invented. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, from self-righteousness. She genuinely believed she was protecting something, protecting order, protecting standards, protecting the invisible social boundaries she thought made the world work. Without realizing it, she was about to reveal exactly who she was, far more clearly than Samuel ever could. Across the plaza, several shoppers slowed down. The atmosphere shifted. Tiny changes, a glance here, a whisper there. People sense conflict before it begins. Samuel opened his hand. The key fob rested in his palm. Victoria saw it. Instead of accepting reality, she doubled down. The possibility that she might be wrong never entered her mind, not once. Because people who spend years surrounding themselves with agreement often stop questioning themselves. Victoria had spent years being listened to, years being obeyed, years being treated like the smartest person in every room. And now that confidence had become blindness. She marched toward Samuel. Her heels struck the pavement sharply. Click, click, click. Each step carried certainty. Each step carried judgment. Each step carried the beginning of a disaster she could not yet see. Samuel heard her approaching before she spoke. He turned politely, the same way he always turned when someone addressed him, the same way he had greeted strangers his entire life. What happened next would change everything. Not because Samuel lost control, not because he argued, not because he became angry, but because Victoria was about to make a decision that would expose far more than Samuel's identity. It would expose her own heart. And once the first accusation left her lips, there would be no taking it back, no rewinding the moment, no pretending it never happened. The Ferrari gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. The fountain splashed quietly behind them. Phones began rising from pockets, and Victoria Sterling opened her mouth, ready to accuse a man she had never met of a crime he had never committed, a crime that, in her mind, already felt like a fact. And before the next 5 minutes were over, police officers would be on their way. The crowd would grow, the cameras would start recording, and Samuel Carter's ordinary afternoon would disappear forever. Victoria Sterling took 3 quick steps forward and planted herself between Samuel and the Ferrari. "Don't touch that car." The courtyard fell strangely quiet. The fountain continued splashing behind them. A violinist near the shopping promenade lowered his bow. Even the security guard who had been watching from a distance seemed unsure whether to intervene. Samuel stopped. Not because he was intimidated, because he genuinely didn't understand what was happening. He held the paper bag in one hand and looked at Victoria with calm curiosity. "Excuse me?" I said, "Don't touch the car." Samuel glanced at the Ferrari, then back at her. A faint smile touched his face. "Ma'am, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Victoria folded her arms. "No. What's happened is perfectly clear." "It is?" "Yes." She pointed directly at the vehicle. "That Ferrari doesn't belong to you." Several people nearby exchanged glances. The crowd had doubled in size. Phones remained pointed toward the scene. Samuel nodded slowly. "And what makes you think that?" Victoria looked him up and down. The gesture was subtle. The meaning wasn't. Samuel understood immediately. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time. At 72 years old, he had spent a lifetime recognizing certain looks. Looks that arrived before words. Looks that made assumptions. Looks that decided who you were before you ever opened your mouth. Still, he kept his voice gentle. "It actually does belong to my family." Victoria laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncertain one. A confident laugh. The kind people use when they believe they're unquestionably right. "Sure it does." "It does." "You expect me to believe that?" Samuel shrugged. "The truth doesn't really depend on belief." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The answer was polite, measured, reasonable. Yet somehow it irritated Victoria even more. Because reasonable people are difficult to fight. And she had already decided this was a fight. She stepped closer. "Then show me proof." Samuel blinked. "Show you proof? Yes. I'm sorry, but I don't answer to you." For the first time, a few observers nodded. The statement sounded perfectly fair. Victoria's face hardened. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged. Especially not publicly. Especially not by someone she had already placed beneath her in the invisible hierarchy she carried inside her head. A distant siren echoed through the afternoon air. The police were getting closer. Victoria smiled. "There. Good." Samuel sighed softly. The sound carried no anger, only disappointment. Not disappointment in Victoria specifically, disappointment in the situation itself. Because he knew exactly how these moments often unfolded. He had seen versions of them before. Different city, different decade, different people. Same assumptions, same outcome. The security guard finally approached. His name tag read Eric.
Good afternoon, sir.
He looked barely 25.
Are you waiting for
Sir,
someone, or
Eric said carefully,
find something?
maybe we should just wait until the officers arrive. Samuel nodded. That's fine. Victoria immediately jumped in. I saw him trying to get into the Ferrari. Samuel looked at her. No, you saw me walk toward it. It's the same thing.
Exactly how it happened, Maria.
It isn't. You had keys. Because they're my keys. A few people chuckled quietly. Victoria did not. The sirens grew louder. Within moments, 2 patrol vehicles turned into the plaza entrance. Blue lights reflected off storefront windows. Conversations stopped entirely. The crowd parted. The police cars rolled to a stop. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Daniel Brooks, mid-30s, confident, alert. And Officer Karen Morales, older, more experienced, observant. Both immediately scanned the scene. The Ferrari, the crowd, Victoria, Samuel. Officer Brooks approached first. Afternoon. What's going on here? Victoria answered before anyone else could speak. Thank goodness you're here. Her voice suddenly sounded different, softer, more vulnerable. Samuel noticed. So did several people filming. Victoria pointed toward him. That man is trying to steal that Ferrari. Officer Brooks turned toward Samuel. Sir? Samuel met his eyes. Good afternoon, officer. Is that your vehicle? It belongs to my family, Victoria scoffed loudly. Officer Brooks held up a hand. Let's take this one step at a time. Samuel nodded. Of course. Do you have identification? Certainly. Slowly and carefully, Samuel reached into his wallet. He handed over his driver's license, then another card, then another. Officer Brooks examined them. Everything appeared valid. Nothing suspicious. Nothing alarming. Officer Morales stepped closer. She watched Samuel carefully, not suspiciously, professionally. She noticed the paper bag, the calm posture, the lack of aggression, the absence of panic. Most guilty people behaved differently. Very differently. Mr. Carter? She asked. Yes, ma'am. You said the vehicle belongs to your family? That's correct. Victoria rolled her eyes. Officer Morales ignored her. Do you have access to the vehicle? Samuel lifted the key fob. The Ferrari blinked. Once. Twice. Several people in the crowd murmured. Victoria immediately jumped in again. He could have found those. Officer Brooks looked uncertain. Not convinced. Not unconvinced. Just uncertain. And uncertainty can be dangerous, especially when enough people are watching. Sir, Brooks said carefully, would you mind waiting over here while we sort this out? Samuel looked at the officer, then at the crowd, then at the Ferrari. Am I being detained? The question surprised several people. Officer Brooks hesitated. Not at this time. Then I'll cooperate. Samuel stepped where instructed. The crowd continued recording. More phones appeared. Someone was live streaming now. Comments scrolled rapidly across the screen. Nobody knew the truth. Everyone had an opinion. The Florida heat settled heavily over the plaza. Sweat formed beneath collars. The fountain continued splashing. Palm trees swayed overhead. And somehow the entire scene felt unreal. An old man holding leftover food from a community kitchen. A luxury Ferrari. A wealthy socialite. 2 police officers. Dozens of strangers, all connected by assumptions. Officer Brooks walked toward the Ferrari. He examined it, checked the plates, ran information through dispatch. Minutes passed. The crowd waited. Victoria remained nearby, watching, smiling occasionally. certain she would be proven right. Samuel remained calm, but inside old memories were beginning to stir. Memories of job interviews that ended the moment he walked into the room. Memories of store clerks following him through aisles. Memories of being doubted, questioned, measured. He had spent decades learning how to survive those moments without allowing them to harden his heart. Yet they still hurt. They always hurt. Officer Morales noticed something most people missed. Samuel never once looked angry. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, as if he'd carried this burden many times before. She found herself wondering who he really was, because nothing about him matched the story Victoria was telling. Meanwhile, Victoria sensed the officers weren't fully convinced. That worried her. So she made a decision, a terrible decision, one that would push everything much further than it needed to go. She stepped toward Officer Brooks, lowered her voice, and began adding details that had never happened. Details that would transform a misunderstanding into something far more serious. And once those words left her mouth, there would be no taking them back. Victoria Sterling stepped closer to Officer Brooks. The crowd leaned in. Phones remained raised. 100 eyes followed every movement. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. For a brief moment, Samuel watched Victoria's face. He saw something there. Not fear, not confusion, determination. The determination of someone who had already decided how the story should end. "I didn't want to say this earlier," Victoria said quietly. Officer Brooks looked at her. "What is it, ma'am?" Victoria lowered her voice further, but not enough. Several people nearby could still hear. "I think he threatened me." The words hung in the air. Officer Morales immediately looked toward Samuel. Not because she believed the accusation, because the accusation changed everything. Threats meant escalation. Threats meant risk. Threats meant procedures. Officer Brooks frowned. "Threatened you how?" Victoria sighed dramatically. "As soon as I questioned him, he became hostile." Samuel closed his eyes briefly. Not out of anger, out of disappointment. The crowd shifted. A murmur spread through the plaza. Hostile. Threatened. Those words carried weight, heavy weight, even when they weren't true. Victoria continued. "He told me I should mind my own business." Officer Brooks scribbled notes. "He said that?"
Understood.
"Yes." That part, technically, wasn't entirely false. Samuel had said something similar, but not in the way she was describing it. Not with hostility, not with aggression. The truth had already begun changing shape. Victoria saw the officers listening and became more confident, more comfortable, more reckless. And before I approached him, I saw him walking around the parking lot. Officer Brooks looked up. "What do you mean?" He was looking into vehicles. Another lie. Smooth. Effortless. Samuel stared at the ground. The paper bag remained in his hands. The sandwiches inside were probably getting cold by now. A strange thought. Yet it crossed his mind. Because even in moments like this, Samuel worried about people waiting for food. Victoria kept talking. He seemed nervous. He was checking cars. He was acting suspicious. The words came faster now, one after another, building a version of reality that had never existed. Officer Brooks listened. Officer Morales watched. And Samuel remained silent. That silence confused everyone. Most people defended themselves. Most people interrupted. Most people argued. Samuel did none of those things. Across the plaza, a valet attendant stood frozen beside a podium. Marcus Reed, 63 years old, tall, lean, silver hair beginning to replace black. He had spent 9 years working at Waterside Plaza, long enough to recognize faces, Long enough to know people. Long enough to know Samuel Carter. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew exactly who Samuel was. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know Victoria was wrong. Enough to know the officers were listening to lies. Enough to know something bad was happening. His fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Several employees stood nearby. None of them moved. Marcus understood why. Jobs mattered. Paychecks mattered. Health insurance mattered. Speaking up carried risks, especially for people like him, especially in places like this. Still, he couldn't stop watching. Back near the Ferrari, Officer Brooks approached Samuel again. "Mr. Carter." "Yes, sir." Victoria hated how calm he sounded. The calm made her story harder to sell. "Victoria says you were walking around looking into vehicles." Samuel blinked. "No." "You weren't?" "No, sir." "Did you threaten her?" "No, sir." Officer Brooks studied him. Samuel met his eyes. Nothing about the old man suggested aggression. Nothing. Officer Morales noticed it too. Yet accusations have a way of creating doubt, even when evidence is thin, especially when enough people are watching. Brooks sighed. "Would you mind sitting over there while we continue sorting this out?" He pointed toward a low concrete curb near the edge of the parking area. The request wasn't technically unreasonable, but something about it landed heavily. Perhaps because Samuel understood what everyone else was seeing. An old black man sitting on a curb, under police supervision, while strangers recorded him. The image would tell its own story, regardless of the truth. Samuel looked at the curb, then at Officer Brooks, then toward the crowd. For a moment, memories returned. Memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. A department store in Georgia, a manager accusing him of taking something he had already paid for. A traffic stop outside Birmingham. An officer questioning why he was driving through a wealthy neighborhood. A bank loan rejection. A job interview. 100 moments. Small moments. Painful moments. Moments that stacked themselves together until they formed a lifetime. Samuel took a slow breath, then another, and another. The same way he had learned to do years ago. Anger never helped. Patience often did. Slowly, he walked toward the curb. The crowd watched. Several people whispered. One teenager zoomed in with his phone camera. A woman shook her head. Another recorded without expression. Everyone was witnessing something. Few understood what. Samuel sat down. The paper bag rested beside him. The afternoon heat radiated from the concrete. Officer Brooks stepped away. Officer Morales remained nearby, watching, thinking, questioning. Across the parking lot, Marcus Reed felt something twist inside his chest, because he recognized the look on Samuel's face. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had spent decades carrying burdens nobody else could see. Marcus looked around. Not one person was helping. Not one. They were recording, observing, commenting. But helping? No. His jaw tightened. 9 years at this job. 9 years of staying quiet. 9 years of swallowing frustration. 9 years of choosing caution. Today felt different. Because today he knew the truth. And every second he remained silent made him part of the lie. Nearby, 2 younger employees chatted nervously. "You know him?" one asked. Marcus nodded. "A little. Is he really trying to steal the car?" Marcus looked at Samuel, then at the Ferrari, then back at the employee. "No." The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without doubt. The younger employee seemed surprised. Then why isn't he saying anything? Marcus stared toward the crowd, because he already knew the answer. Sometimes people spend their whole lives learning that defending themselves isn't enough. Sometimes truth arrives slower than accusations. And sometimes dignity means refusing to become the angry person others expect you to be. Marcus looked back toward Samuel. Their eyes met briefly across the parking lot. Samuel gave the smallest nod. Nothing dramatic, just acknowledgement. Marcus felt something shift inside him. The decision was beginning to make itself. Meanwhile, Victoria continued speaking to anyone willing to listen. Every minute made her bolder. Every minute made the story larger. Every minute pushed the situation further from reality. Officer Morales watched her carefully. And the more she watched, the less comfortable she became. Something wasn't right. Her instincts told her that. Experience told her that. The calm old man sitting on the curb didn't match the dangerous figure Victoria kept describing. Not even close. Yet before Morales could pursue that thought any further, another voice finally spoke up from the far side of the parking lot. A voice nobody expected. A voice that belonged to someone who had spent nearly a decade staying invisible. Marcus Reed stepped away from the valet podium, and for the first time that afternoon, someone prepared to tell the truth. Every step felt heavier than it should have. 9 years. That was how long Marcus had worked at Waterside Plaza. 9 years of opening doors, parking luxury vehicles, carrying shopping bags, smiling politely, staying invisible. He knew exactly how places like this worked. He knew who received the benefit of the doubt, and who didn't. As he crossed the parking lot, several employees watched him. Some looked worried, others looked away. Nobody followed. Marcus understood why. Standing up was expensive, sometimes more expensive than staying silent. Officer Morales noticed him approaching first. "Can I help you, sir?" Marcus swallowed. His mouth felt dry. "Yeah." He glanced toward Samuel, then back at the officers. "I know him." The crowd grew quieter. Phones tilted toward Marcus. Victoria Sterling immediately frowned. "Who are you?" Marcus ignored her. "I know Mr. Carter." Officer Brooks looked interested. "You do?" "Yes." "How?" "I've seen him here before." Victoria folded her arms. "So what?" Marcus took a breath. "He isn't stealing that Ferrari." The statement landed heavily. Several people exchanged glances. Officer Brooks looked from Marcus to Samuel. "What makes you say that?" Marcus pointed toward the Ferrari. "I've seen him around that car before." Victoria laughed sharply. "That doesn't prove anything." Marcus kept talking. "He comes through here every now and then." "With the Ferrari?" "Yes." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. Officer Morales remained focused. "How many times?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Maybe 6 or 7. The crowd murmured. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty began moving in a different direction. Not toward Samuel, toward Victoria. She noticed immediately. And she hated it. "That's ridiculous." Marcus turned toward her. "No, ma'am. You're mistaken." "I'm not." The tension thickened. A breeze moved through the palm trees overhead. The fountain continued splashing in the background. Traffic drifted past beyond the shopping center. Life continued around them. Yet inside the parking lot, everything seemed frozen. Officer Brooks looked thoughtful. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Marcus hesitated. Because the answer was uncomfortable. Because the answer was true. "I wasn't sure anybody wanted to hear it." The honesty surprised everyone, especially Officer Morales. Victoria opened her mouth to argue again, but before she could, Brooks held up a hand. "Let's keep this orderly." Marcus nodded. Samuel remained seated on the curb, watching, listening, still silent. The paper bag rested beside him. The sandwiches inside had long since cooled, yet somehow he seemed more concerned about everyone else's emotions than his own humiliation. That was who Samuel Carter was. Officer Morales walked toward him. "Mr. Carter, yes, ma'am." "You know Mr. Reed?" Samuel smiled faintly. "I do. How long?" "A few years." Marcus smiled back. The exchange looked natural, comfortable. Nothing about it suggested strangers. Nothing about it suggested criminal behavior. Victoria saw the shift happening. The narrative she had built all afternoon was beginning to crack, and people like Victoria often reacted poorly when certainty started slipping away. She took a step forward. "Officer, he's just covering for him." The accusation came quickly, almost automatically. Marcus looked at her, not angrily, just sadly. The kind of sadness that comes from recognizing a person who has spent too long judging others. "I don't even know you," Victoria continued. "That's true," Marcus replied. "So why should anybody believe you?" Marcus looked toward Samuel, then toward the crowd, then back at Victoria. "Because I'm telling the truth." For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Officer Morales broke it. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." Marcus nodded and stepped back. Not because he was finished caring, because he had said what needed to be said. Now the truth had a voice. Whether anyone listened was another matter entirely. As Marcus returned toward the valet podium, his heart pounded harder than it had in years. He had no idea whether speaking up would cost him his job. He only knew that staying silent would have cost him something worse: his self-respect. Back near the curb, Samuel watched him go. A small smile touched his face, a grateful smile, almost invisible. Yet Marcus saw it, and somehow that was enough. The crowd remained divided. Some people now questioned Victoria's story. Others continued believing her. Several simply wanted drama. The phones kept recording. Comments kept streaming across social media. A teenager whispered to his friend, "I don't think that old guy did anything." His friend nodded. "Me neither." Small shifts, tiny changes. The truth often moved that way, slowly, quietly, one person at a time. Officer Brooks walked toward his patrol car. He still seemed uncertain. Victoria noticed, and uncertainty frightened her, because uncertainty meant losing control. So she doubled down. Again. "Officer." Brooks turned. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't understand." "What don't I understand?" Victoria lowered her voice. "He made me feel unsafe." The phrase landed differently this time, not because it carried evidence, because it carried emotion. And emotions often influence situations where facts should matter more. Officer Brooks sighed. The situation was becoming complicated, far more complicated than a simple misunderstanding. Officer Morales looked toward Samuel again. The old man sat quietly on the curb beneath the late afternoon sun. A little boy standing with his mother near the fountain watched him carefully. After several seconds, the child tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom?" "Yeah, honey? If that man didn't do anything." The mother glanced toward Samuel, then toward the police officers, then toward Victoria. "What is it?" The boy pointed. "Why is he sitting there?" The mother didn't answer immediately, because she didn't know how. The question felt bigger than a child realized. Samuel heard it. So did Officer Morales. So did Marcus. Even Victoria. The little boy continued. "He looks sad." Samuel lowered his eyes. Not because he wanted to hide. Because the child was right. He was sad. Not for himself. For what moments like this revealed about people? The question lingered in the warm air. Nobody seemed capable of answering it. And as Samuel sat on the curb, another memory surfaced, one from decades ago, a younger version of himself, standing outside a store, being questioned, being doubted, being watched. He remembered the feeling, the exhaustion, the helplessness, the loneliness. Back then he had been angry. Very angry. Now he was simply tired. Tired of seeing the same assumptions survive generation after generation. Tired of watching good people remain silent because speaking carried consequences. Tired of knowing exactly how fragile dignity could be. Slowly, he reached into his pocket. Officer Morales noticed immediately. So did Officer Brooks. The crowd leaned forward. Victoria watched carefully. Samuel pulled out his phone. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just a phone. He stared at the screen for several seconds. His expression softened. Then he opened a message window. His thumbs moved slowly, patiently, deliberately. Only a few words. No panic. No explanation. No dramatic plea. When he finished typing, he looked at the message one last time, then pressed send. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, a man whose name nobody in that parking lot recognized was about to receive a text that would change everything. The message contained only 4 simple words. Dad needs a little help. Samuel stared at the screen for a moment after pressing send. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket. That was all. No explanation. No panic. No long description of what had happened. Just 4 words. The crowd expected something dramatic. A lawyer. A complaint. An argument. Instead, the old man sat quietly on the curb beneath the fading Florida sun. Officer Brooks glanced toward him. Who'd you text? Samuel looked up. My son. Brooks nodded. Nothing about that answer seemed unusual. Everyone had family. Everyone called someone eventually. The officer thought no more about it. Victoria certainly didn't. She almost laughed when she heard it. His son. Good. Let him call his son. Maybe the son would come explain why his father was trying to get into a Ferrari. The thought pleased her. The story still made perfect sense in her mind. The old man was bluffing. Eventually the truth would come out. At least that was what she believed. Across the country, nearly 1,500 miles away, another afternoon was unfolding very differently. New York City. Glass towers. Private elevators. Television cameras. A ballroom filled with some of the most powerful business leaders in America. The annual Future Horizons Economic Summit had just concluded. The audience stood applauding. Photographers snapped pictures. Reporters gathered near the stage. The keynote speaker smiled politely and accepted another handshake. His name was Ethan Carter, 42 years old, founder and CEO of Carter Innovations, technology entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, billionaire. Magazine covers had called him many things: visionary, disruptor, business genius. Ethan ignored most of those labels. The only title that truly mattered to him was son. As he stepped off stage, his assistant hurried beside him. Excellent speech, sir. Thank you. You have interviews with CNBC in 20 minutes. Okay. Then dinner with the investors. Ethan nodded. His phone vibrated. Once. He glanced down automatically. The moment he saw the sender's name, everything else disappeared. Dad. A smile appeared instantly. Samuel rarely texted, rarely called, rarely asked for anything. The old man believed in solving his own problems. Always had. Ethan opened the message. Dad needs a little help. The smile vanished. Not because the message sounded dramatic, because it sounded unusual, extremely unusual. His father never sent messages like that. Never. Something was wrong. Ethan stopped walking. The assistant nearly bumped into him. Sir? He read the text again. Then one more time. The ballroom noise faded into the background. Cancel everything. The assistant blinked. Excuse me? Everything. The interviews? Yes. The investor dinner? Yes. The board call tonight? Everything. The assistant looked stunned. Ethan never canceled events. Never. Yet something in his face ended all discussion. Is there an emergency? Ethan stared at the phone. Maybe. A few seconds later, he was already moving. Fast. Purposeful. The same way he moved during corporate crises worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Except this felt different. More personal. Far more important. As they crossed the lobby of the hotel, he called Samuel. Straight to voicemail. That worried him even more. His father always answered. Always. Unless something prevented him. Ethan called again. No answer. The knot in his stomach tightened. Get the jet ready. The assistant hurried to make calls. Where are we going? Florida. Where in Florida? Ethan looked at the message one final time, then called the number he knew by heart. The community kitchen. Linda Watkins answered. New Hope Community Kitchen. Linda, it's Ethan. Oh, Ethan. Her cheerful voice immediately softened. Everything okay? When did you see my father last? Earlier today. Did he mention where he was going? Linda thought for a moment. He had deliveries. After that? He said something about heading toward Naples. Ethan's heart sank. Naples. The Ferrari. Suddenly a possibility formed. An unpleasant possibility. Because Ethan knew something almost nobody else did. His father hated driving expensive cars. Hated them. Always had. The Ferrari wasn't really Samuel's style. It belonged to Carter Innovations, one of several company vehicles available to family members. Samuel only used it occasionally when Ethan insisted, mostly because the billionaire enjoyed teasing his father. You should enjoy life a little more. That had become Ethan's favorite argument. Samuel usually laughed, then ignored him. The thought flashed through Ethan's mind now. An elderly black man, standing near a Ferrari, in a wealthy shopping district. The combination worried him immediately, far more than he wanted to admit. Back in Naples, nearly an hour had passed. The crowd remained. Some people had left. Others had arrived. New spectators replaced old ones. The story kept growing. Videos continued spreading online. Nobody knew the names involved, yet people were watching, commenting, speculating. Victoria remained convinced she would eventually be proven right. Officer Brooks continued sorting through information. Officer Morales watched quietly. Marcus remained near the valet podium, and Samuel sat patiently on the curb. Waiting. The sky had begun changing colors. Orange and gold stretched across the horizon. Long shadows crossed the parking lot. The fountain reflected sunlight like liquid fire. Samuel looked up at the evening sky. For a brief moment, he thought about Diane. His wife always knew how to calm him. Even after all these years, he sometimes imagined what she would say. Probably something simple. Probably something wise. Maybe she'd tell him not to worry. Maybe she'd remind him that truth arrives on its own schedule. Samuel smiled slightly. The thought comforted him. A few feet away, Officer Morales approached again. Mr. Carter. Yes, ma'am. You doing okay? The question surprised him, because it sounded genuine. Not procedural. Not official. Human. Samuel nodded. I'm all right. She studied him carefully. Most people in his position would be angry, humiliated, frustrated. He seemed none of those things, only patient. "You're handling this better than most people would." Samuel smiled faintly. "Life gives you practice." Morales didn't know how to answer that. Before she could respond, Victoria interrupted once again. "Officer." Morales sighed internally. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I think we need to search the car." The request immediately changed the atmosphere. Officer Brooks looked over. "So we're back to that?" Victoria nodded firmly. "If he has nothing to hide, what's the problem?" Samuel lowered his eyes. "Not again. Always the same logic. Always the same assumption. The burden never seemed to fall on the accusation, only on the accused." Officer Brooks hesitated. The situation had become increasingly complicated, and now uncertainty hung over everything. Marcus felt it. Morales felt it. Even some members of the crowd felt it. Yet nobody knew the truth. Not yet. Several states away, a private jet was already climbing into the evening sky. Its destination was Naples. Its passenger sat quietly by a window, looking down at the clouds, holding a phone, waiting for answers. And everyone in that parking lot was about to learn exactly who Ethan Carter was, though not one of them could imagine how quickly their entire understanding of the day was about to change. The sun hung low above Naples. Golden light spilled across the luxury storefronts. The crowd had thinned slightly, but enough people remained to keep the story alive. Phones were still recording. Videos were still uploading. Comments were multiplying across social media. The old man sitting on the curb had become a mystery, and mysteries attract attention. Samuel Carter checked his watch, not because he was impatient, because he knew his son. If Ethan had seen the message, he was already moving. Officer Brooks stood near his patrol car reviewing information on a tablet. Officer Morales remained nearby. Marcus Reed watched from the valet podium. Victoria Sterling paced restlessly. She didn't like how long things were taking. She didn't like the uncertainty. Most of all, she didn't like that Samuel still looked calm. People who were caught doing something wrong weren't supposed to look like that, at least not in her experience. The crowd's confidence in her story had started fading, and she could feel it. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every question. The certainty she had enjoyed earlier was slowly disappearing. A few people had even started asking uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't Samuel tried to leave? Why had the key fob worked? Why did he seem so relaxed? Victoria hated those questions, because questions create doubt, and doubt threatens certainty. A young man standing near the fountain suddenly looked up. "What's that?" Several heads turned. A low rumble echoed from beyond the plaza entrance. At first it sounded like ordinary traffic. Then the vehicles appeared. 3 black SUVs, identical, glossy, expensive, moving in perfect formation. The crowd immediately noticed. People always noticed money. The SUVs rolled through the entrance and headed directly toward the parking area. Conversations stopped. Even Victoria paused. Officer Brooks looked up. Officer Morales narrowed her eyes. Marcus felt something shift. The vehicles didn't belong there. Not like this. The first SUV came to a stop, then the second, then the third. Doors remained closed for a moment. The entire plaza seemed to hold its breath. Samuel remained seated. A faint smile touched his face. The first door opened. A security professional stepped out. Then another. Then another. Well-dressed. Earpieces. Dark suits. Professional. Disciplined. The crowd immediately began whispering. Who are they? What's going on? Is somebody famous here? Victoria's confidence weakened further. Something about this felt different. Important. Officer Brooks straightened his posture. The rear passenger door of the middle SUV opened slowly. A man stepped out. Tall, athletic, perfectly tailored navy suit, silver watch, confident stride, not flashy, not loud, just powerful. The reaction was immediate. A woman near the fountain gasped. Oh my God, someone else recognized him too. No way. The whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan Carter. That's Ethan Carter. The Ethan Carter? Yeah, the billionaire, the entrepreneur, the man whose face appeared on magazine covers and financial news programs, the founder of Carter Innovations, one of the most recognizable business leaders in America. Even Officer Brooks recognized him. Victoria froze. She knew the name. Everybody knew the name. But she couldn't understand why he was here. Of all places, of all days, of all moments. Ethan didn't look toward the crowd, didn't acknowledge the cameras, didn't speak to the officers, didn't even glance at Victoria. Instead, his eyes searched the parking lot, looking for one person. Then he found him. Samuel. For a brief moment, the billionaire's face softened completely. The businessman vanished. The public figure disappeared. Only a son remained. Ethan walked directly across the parking lot, past the officers, past the crowd, past Victoria. People moved out of his way instinctively. Nobody stopped him. Nobody dared. Victoria watched him approach Samuel. Confusion became concern. Concern became fear. And fear began becoming realization. Samuel slowly stood from the curb. The paper bag remained in his hand. His shirt still looked worn. His shoes still looked old. Nothing about him had changed. Yet somehow, everything had. Ethan stopped directly in front of him. For 1 second, neither man spoke. Then Ethan wrapped his arms around his father. A genuine hug. Not for cameras. Not for appearances. For love. For relief. For family. Dad. Samuel smiled. Hey, son, you okay? I'm all right. The parking lot went silent. Utterly silent. The words hit the crowd like thunder. Dad. The billionaire had called the old man Dad. Several phones nearly dropped. Someone actually gasped. Another person whispered a curse under their breath. Victoria felt her stomach drop. Hard. No. No. That couldn't be right. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. Ethan stepped back and looked his father over carefully. You sure you're okay? Samuel nodded. I've had worse afternoons. The old man's humor broke some of the tension. A few people laughed nervously. Nobody knew what else to do. Officer Morales watched the exchange, and suddenly everything clicked. The calmness, the confidence, the patience. Samuel had never been bluffing, not once. Marcus Reed smiled for the first time all afternoon. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. Victoria felt her heartbeat accelerating. Something terrible was happening. Not physically, socially, professionally, personally. She simply didn't know how terrible yet. Ethan finally turned toward the officers. His expression remained polite, professional, controlled. But there was steel underneath it, the kind built through decades of success, the kind people rarely challenged twice. Good afternoon, officers. Officer Brooks nodded. Mr. Carter. Ethan extended his hand. Brooks shook it automatically. The crowd couldn't stop staring. The billionaire looked back toward Samuel, then toward the Ferrari, then toward Victoria. His eyes lingered there, just briefly. Yet something about that glance made Victoria wish she could disappear. Would somebody mind explaining why my father was sitting on a curb? Nobody answered immediately. The question hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time all day, she wasn't sure what to say, because the story she had spent hours building was collapsing in real time, and everyone could see it. The crowd, the officers, the employees, the cameras, everyone. Ethan looked toward Samuel. "Want me to handle this?" Samuel smiled softly. "No." The answer surprised him. Samuel continued, "I think the truth is finally catching up." The words landed differently now, because suddenly the truth had arrived with a name, a face, and unimaginable influence. Victoria stared at the ground. Her hands trembled. The realization was beginning to settle in. She hadn't accused a thief. She hadn't embarrassed a stranger. She had publicly humiliated the father of one of the richest men in America. And the worst part? That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for her. Not even close. Because within the next few minutes, Ethan Carter was about to reveal something that would turn Victoria Sterling's entire world upside down. The parking lot had become completely silent. Even the fountain seemed quieter. The phones remained raised. The cameras continued recording. But nobody was talking anymore. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for the explanation. Waiting for the truth. Waiting to understand how a man who looked like Samuel Carter could be connected to one of the most powerful billionaires in America. Ethan glanced toward his father, then toward the Ferrari, then toward Officer Brooks. His expression remained calm, very calm, the same calm Samuel carried. For the first time, several people noticed how similar they looked. The eyes, the smile, the patience, the resemblance suddenly felt obvious. Victoria wished she had noticed it earlier. She wished a lot of things. Ethan finally spoke. "Would someone mind telling me what happened?" Officer Brooks cleared his throat. The situation felt awkward now, painfully awkward. He summarized the events as professionally as possible. The accusation, the call, the misunderstanding, the investigation, the curb, the crowd, the recording. Each detail seemed worse when spoken aloud. Ethan listened without interruption, without anger, without visible emotion. That somehow made everyone even more uncomfortable. When Brooks finished, Ethan nodded slowly, then looked toward Samuel. "Everything accurate?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Mostly." "Mostly? You forgot the part where I missed delivering dinner." A few nervous laughs escaped the crowd. Even Officer Morales smiled. Ethan shook his head. "Of course that's what you're worried about." Samuel shrugged. "People are hungry." The exchange felt so normal, so human. It contrasted sharply with the tension surrounding them. Victoria stared in disbelief. How could they be joking? How could they remain calm? How could Samuel look more concerned about sandwiches than humiliation? Because she didn't understand him. She never had. Ethan turned toward the Ferrari. "Officer, would you like to know why my father had the keys?" Officer Brooks nodded. "Yes, sir. The vehicle belongs to Carter Innovations." The crowd reacted immediately. Several people gasped. Someone muttered, "Wow!" Ethan continued, "My father is authorized to use any company vehicle he wants." Victoria felt her stomach sink lower, but Ethan wasn't finished. Not even close. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. A few quick taps. Then he turned the screen toward Officer Brooks. Corporate registration documents, vehicle ownership records, authorization agreements, everything. Clean, official, undeniable. Brooks reviewed them, then looked up. "There appears to be no question regarding ownership." "No," Ethan replied. "There isn't." The statement landed like a hammer. For the first time all day, there was no ambiguity, No uncertainty, no misunderstanding, only facts. Victoria swallowed hard. Her confidence had completely vanished. The story she had built was collapsing piece by piece, and the collapse wasn't finished. Not yet. Ethan turned toward her. Not aggressively, not dramatically. Simply directly. The way people do when they want answers. Mrs. Sterling? Victoria looked up. Yes? You called the police? Her throat felt dry. Yes. Why? The question sounded simple, yet she couldn't answer it. Not honestly, not in front of everyone, because the real answer was ugly. The crowd waited. Victoria searched desperately for something reasonable to say. I thought. She stopped. I believed. Another stop, finally. I was trying to protect people. The sentence sounded weak, even to her. Ethan nodded slowly, then asked a question that felt even heavier. What exactly made you believe my father was stealing the car? No answer. Victoria looked away. The silence lasted several seconds. Too long. Long enough for everyone to understand. Officer Morales lowered her eyes. Marcus Reed folded his arms. Several people in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody needed the answer anymore. The silence had become the answer. Ethan looked toward Samuel. Did you tell her it was yours? I did. And? Samuel smiled sadly. She didn't believe me. The words hurt more than anger ever could, because they were true, simple, honest, painfully honest. A breeze drifted through the parking lot. Palm leaves rustled overhead. The sunlight continued fading. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. Victoria suddenly felt exposed. For the first time in years, she wasn't the person controlling the room. The room was judging her. Then Ethan asked a question nobody expected. Mrs. Sterling, what's your husband's name? Victoria blinked. The question seemed unrelated. Richard Sterling. Ethan nodded. I thought so. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over her. Something in his tone changed. Not threatening. Certain. He opened another document on his phone. Then another. Then another. His assistant, standing nearby, handed him a tablet. Ethan reviewed something quickly, then looked back up. Interesting. Victoria's heart pounded. What? Ethan met her eyes. Your husband's company submitted an investment proposal to Carter Innovations 3 weeks ago. The world seemed to stop. Several people gasped. Marcus nearly laughed. Officer Brooks looked stunned. Even Samuel looked surprised. Victoria felt all the blood drained from her face. No, no, no. That couldn't be possible. But it was. Ethan continued. The proposal requested approximately $250 million in development financing. Nobody spoke. The crowd stared. Victoria stared. The billionaire's voice remained perfectly calm. The review process hasn't been completed yet. Another pause. Then, I've heard good things about the company. The sentence should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt terrifying, because everyone understood what he wasn't saying. Victoria understood it most of all. Earlier that afternoon, she believed she was protecting her community from a stranger. Now she was standing in front of a man whose family could influence the future of her husband's largest business project. And she had accused his father of being a criminal. The realization hit like a wave. Her knees felt weak. For the first time all day, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Not fear of punishment. Fear of consequences. Fear of understanding what she had done. Yet Ethan still wasn't angry. that somehow made everything worse. Victoria finally found her voice. "I didn't know." The words barely emerged. "I didn't know who he was." Samuel looked at her quietly, then spoke. For the first time since Ethan arrived, his voice remained soft, gentle, almost kind. "That's exactly the problem." The parking lot fell silent again, because everyone understood what he meant. You shouldn't need to know who someone is before treating them with dignity. You shouldn't need a billionaire son before receiving respect. You shouldn't need power before receiving fairness. Samuel's words carried more weight than any speech, more weight than any accusation, more weight than any headline. Victoria lowered her head. The truth had finally arrived, and it hurt. But the day wasn't finished, not even close, because while the crowd now understood who Samuel Carter was, they still didn't know who Victoria Sterling had been. And before the story ended, secrets buried for years were about to surface. Secrets that would prove this wasn't the first time she had judged someone she didn't bother to know. The videos spread faster than anyone expected. By midnight, thousands of people had watched them. By sunrise, the number had climbed into the hundreds of thousands. The internet had done what it always did. It asked questions. And once enough people started asking questions, answers began appearing. The first video came from a teenager who had been standing near the fountain. The second came from a woman sitting outside a coffee shop across the plaza. The third came from a tourist visiting Naples for the weekend. Different angles, different voices, same story. An elderly black man, a Ferrari, a public accusation, a billionaire son, and one question that seemed to dominate every comment section. Why didn't she believe him? The videos were shared across social media platforms throughout the night. News stations picked them up. Bloggers discussed them. Radio hosts debated them. People who had never heard of Samuel Carter suddenly knew his name. Yet something unexpected happened. The focus slowly shifted away from the Ferrari, away from Ethan Carter, away from money, toward Samuel, toward the man himself. People became curious. Who was he? What kind of father raised someone like Ethan Carter? What kind of person stayed calm through public humiliation? The answers began arriving the following morning, and they arrived from people Victoria Sterling had never imagined. The first call came from Orlando. A local reporter received an email from a man named Carlos Mendoza. Carlos owned a catering company, a successful one. He attached a photograph, then another, then a written statement. By lunchtime, his story was circulating online. 3 years earlier, Carlos had been delivering food to a charity event hosted by a social organization where Victoria served on the board. He remembered arriving early, professional, prepared, dressed in a pressed uniform. Yet before anyone asked his name, Victoria had questioned whether he belonged there. She had mistaken him for a day laborer, then a delivery driver, then someone who should be using a service entrance. Carlos never forgot the embarrassment, not because of what she said, because she never bothered learning who he was. The story gained traction quickly. Then another appeared. A retired school teacher named Angela Henderson spoke publicly. She and her husband had attended a private fundraising event years earlier. Several guests welcomed them warmly. One person did not. Victoria. Angela described spending an entire evening feeling unwelcome despite holding the same invitation as everyone else. Again, Victoria never used offensive language, never raised her voice, never created a scene, yet somehow managed to communicate exactly how she felt. Angela remembered every second. The stories kept coming, one after another. Not dramatic, not sensational, just consistent. A pattern. 100 tiny moments revealing the same truth. Victoria judged first, learned later, if she learned at all. Meanwhile, Samuel Carter woke up Saturday morning exactly as he always did. He brewed coffee, read quietly, and tried avoiding television. Ethan failed completely at helping with that goal. "Dad, you're everywhere." Samuel sighed. "I was hoping not to be." They sat together in Ethan's temporary Naples residence overlooking the water. The sunrise painted the Gulf in shades of gold and orange. Luxury yachts drifted across the horizon. Samuel barely noticed them. He was watching pelicans. "You know," Ethan said, scrolling through headlines, "most people would enjoy this." "What?" "Being the center of attention," Samuel laughed. "Most people need hobbies." For the first time since arriving in Florida, Ethan relaxed. The crisis had passed. His father was safe. Nothing else mattered, or so he thought. The doorbell rang. Ethan frowned. "I'll get it." A few moments later, he returned accompanied by a woman. Samuel recognized her instantly. Emily, the young mother from the roadside. She looked nervous, almost overwhelmed. Tyler stood beside her holding the same stuffed dinosaur. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tyler pointed. "Mom, that's him." Emily nodded. "I know." Samuel stood. A smile spread across his face. "Well, look at that." Emily laughed through tears. "I can't believe it's really you." Ethan looked confused. "You two know each other?" Samuel immediately knew what had happened. The videos, the news coverage, the internet. Emily wiped her eyes. "You fixed my car." Recognition appeared on Ethan's face. "Oh." Samuel smiled. "It wasn't much." Emily shook her head. "It was everything." The room became quiet. Tyler stepped forward. "You gave us sandwiches." Samuel nodded. "I remember. And money." Samuel looked slightly embarrassed. Ethan burst out laughing. "You gave away money again?" Samuel shrugged. The reaction told Emily everything she needed to know. This wasn't unusual. This was who he was. For the next hour, she told Ethan the entire story. The broken car, the heat, the kindness, the envelope, the advice, the way Samuel left before receiving thanks. By the time she finished, Ethan's eyes were shining. Not with sadness, with pride. The kind only children feel when they realize the world finally sees what they've always known about a parent. After Emily left, another story appeared, then another, then another. Former volunteers from the community kitchen spoke publicly. Shelter workers, neighbors, church members, retired veterans, single parents, people Samuel had helped for decades. Most had never met Ethan. Many didn't even know Samuel had a wealthy son. That wasn't why they loved him. They loved him because he showed up, again and again and again. The story transformed. News anchors stopped discussing the Ferrari. Commentators stopped discussing wealth. The conversation became something else entirely. Character, kindness, dignity. One evening, a national television host said something that resonated across the country. "Maybe the most remarkable thing about this story isn't that Samuel Carter is the father of a billionaire." The host paused. "It's that he was already extraordinary before anyone knew it." The clip went viral. Millions watched. Millions agreed. Back in Naples, Victoria Sterling sat alone in her living room. The curtains remained closed. The television stayed off. Her phone never stopped ringing. Friends, associates, reporters, lawyers, everyone wanted something. Most wanted explanations. Few offered sympathy. For the first time in years, Victoria found herself confronting something she had spent decades avoiding. Herself. The uncomfortable truth wasn't that Samuel had a billionaire son. The uncomfortable truth was that she never would have treated him that way if she'd known. And that realization hurt more than any public embarrassment, because it revealed exactly who she had become. Meanwhile, Samuel spent the evening somewhere very different. Not in a television studio, not at a press conference. not attending interviews. He was back at New Hope Community Kitchen, washing trays, stacking chairs, sweeping floors, exactly where he wanted to be. Linda watched him work. "You know you're famous now." Samuel smiled. "No." "You are." "No." He handed her a stack of clean trays. "I'm just me." Linda laughed. The answer sounded exactly like something a Samuel Carter would say. Because fame had changed nothing. Money had changed nothing. Attention had changed nothing. He remained the same man who stopped for strangers, the same man who carried sandwiches in paper bags, the same man who believed people deserved kindness before they earned it. And before the story finally ended, Samuel Carter was about to make one last decision, a decision that would leave everyone speechless, including Victoria Sterling herself. 3 months later, the story should have been over. Most stories like this disappeared after a few news cycles. People moved on. The internet found something new. The headlines faded. The outrage cooled. But this story refused to disappear. Not because of the Ferrari, not because of Ethan Carter, and not because of Victoria Sterling. It endured because people saw something rare. They saw kindness remain kind, even after being humiliated, even after being judged, even after being given every reason to become bitter. Autumn arrived in Florida. The air grew slightly cooler. Palm trees still swayed above the Gulf. Tourists still filled the beaches. Life continued. Yet many lives had quietly changed. Marcus Reed no longer worked behind the valet podium. The events of that afternoon had become a turning point. Several business owners who watched the viral videos reached out after seeing him speak up. One opportunity led to another. Eventually, Marcus accepted a position as guest services director for a hospitality company partnered with one of Ethan Carter's charitable foundations. His office overlooked a marina. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet space with sunlight and a view. On the corner of his desk sat a framed photograph, not of celebrities, not of business leaders. A picture of himself and Samuel standing beside a coffee truck after a volunteer event. Whenever someone asked why he kept it there, Marcus always gave the same answer. Because that's the day I remembered who I wanted to be. Emily's life changed too. Not overnight, not magically. Real life rarely works that way. But after her story gained attention, she received help. A nonprofit scholarship program funded by the Carter Foundation covered her vocational training. Within months, she secured a stable position with a local healthcare network. For the first time in years, she wasn't choosing between groceries and rent. Tyler's grades improved. The stress inside their small apartment slowly disappeared. One afternoon, Tyler wrote an essay at school about his hero. The teacher expected an athlete, maybe a firefighter, perhaps a famous entrepreneur. Instead, he wrote about an old man who fixed a broken car. The essay ended with a sentence his teacher never forgot. "Mr. Samuel showed me that rich people aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the biggest hearts." Meanwhile, Ethan Carter returned to New York. Business resumed. Meetings resumed. Investments resumed. The world continued demanding pieces of his attention. Yet something inside him had shifted. For years he had built companies. Now he found himself thinking more often about legacy, about impact, about the example his father had quietly set long before success arrived. One evening he stood before a room full of executives. The presentation behind him displayed quarterly projections worth billions. Instead of discussing profits immediately, he began with a story about a man carrying sandwiches in a paper bag, a story about dignity, a story about character. When he finished, the room remained silent. Then one executive finally spoke. "Your father sounds extraordinary." Ethan smiled. "He is." Across the country, Samuel Carter's life looked almost identical to the way it had before the videos. That surprised many people. The invitations arrived: television interviews, speaking engagements, book offers, podcast appearances, documentary proposals. Samuel declined nearly all of them, politely, respectfully, firmly. His Saturdays remained sacred. Every weekend he still arrived before sunrise at New Hope Community Kitchen, still brewed coffee, still carried boxes, still washed trays, still greeted every person the same way. One rainy Saturday morning, Linda Watkins shook her head while watching him stack supplies. "You realize most people would use this attention." Samuel smiled. "For what?" Linda laughed. "To build a brand." "I already have a brand." "Oh, really?" He handed her a box. "Be kind." She laughed so hard she nearly dropped it. The simplicity of the answer somehow made it perfect. Then came the surprise nobody expected, including Victoria Sterling. Several months after the incident, Samuel received a letter, a handwritten letter. No lawyers, no reporters, no public statements, just a letter. The return address belonged to Victoria. Samuel read it alone, slowly, carefully. Several pages. No excuses. No attempts to justify what happened. No blaming anyone else. Only honesty. For perhaps the first time in her life, Victoria wrote about embarrassment, about shame, about recognizing things inside herself she had spent years ignoring. She admitted she would have treated Samuel differently if she had known who he was, and realizing that truth had forced her to confront the person she had become. The final paragraph was short. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted to tell you that I finally understand why I was wrong." Samuel folded the letter, placed it on the table, and sat quietly for a long time. When Ethan visited the following weekend, he found the letter. "She wrote you?" Samuel nodded. "What are you going to do?" Ethan already knew his father well enough to fear the answer. Samuel smiled, the exact smile Ethan expected. "I'm going to write back." "Of course you are." Samuel laughed. Ethan shook his head. "You know most people would never forgive her. I'm not most people." "No." Ethan smiled. "You're definitely not." A few weeks later, Victoria received a letter of her own. Short, simple, written in Samuel's careful handwriting. The final line read, "Growth begins the moment we stop defending our mistakes and start learning from them." Victoria cried when she read it. Not because everything was fixed. Not because forgiveness erased consequences. Because grace had arrived where she expected anger. And grace can be harder to carry than judgment. The following spring, Ethan funded the construction of a new community center in Tampa. He wanted to name it after his father. Samuel refused. Absolutely refused. The argument lasted 2 weeks. Finally, they compromised. The building would be called the Open Hands Community Center. Inside the entrance hung a single framed quote. No photograph, no biography, no mention of wealth. Just words. The same words Samuel's mother once taught him decades earlier. If your hands are full of blessings, they should never stay closed. The center opened on a bright Saturday morning. Families filled the courtyard. Children ran through the grass. Volunteers served food. Music drifted through the air. Marcus attended. Emily and Tyler attended. Linda attended. Even Officer Morales came. The only person missing was the one everyone wanted to honor. Because Samuel was inside the kitchen helping wash dishes, exactly where he'd always be. Late that afternoon, a young reporter finally managed to catch him leaving. "Mr. Carter?" Samuel turned. The reporter hurried over. "I have one question." Samuel smiled. "Only one?" The reporter laughed. "Just one." He nodded. "Go ahead." The young man held up a recorder. After everything that happened, after the attention, the headlines, the interviews, the controversy, what do you want people to remember? Samuel looked across the courtyard. Children were laughing. Volunteers were serving meals. The sun was setting. Golden light stretched across the grass. For a moment he thought about the Ferrari, the police cars, the crowd, the humiliation. Then he thought about Marcus, Emily, Tyler, the community center, his son, his wife, his mother, all the things that truly mattered. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet, but everyone nearby heard it. People deserve respect before you know whether they're rich or poor. The reporter lowered his recorder. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing left to add. Samuel smiled politely and continued walking. The crowd parted naturally, not because he was famous, not because he was connected to a billionaire, because people respected him. And that respect had been earned long before anyone knew his name. The evening sun settled low on the horizon. The sounds of laughter drifted through the community center. Somewhere in the parking lot sat an expensive Ferrari. Almost nobody noticed it anymore, because the car had never been the story. The billionaire had never been the story. Even the accusation had never been the story. The story was a man, a good man. A man who chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. A man who carried dignity when humiliation tried to take it away. A man who proved that character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when life gives you every reason to stop caring. And still, somehow, you choose to care anyway. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Because somewhere, someone may need the reminder Samuel Carter gave the world. The greatest wealth a person can possess is not what they own. It's how they treat people who can do nothing for them. And maybe that's why the moment people remember most isn't Ethan Carter stepping out of those black SUVs. It's Samuel Carter quietly returning to the community kitchen, washing dishes and serving meals as if nothing had happened. Because in the end, the man never changed when the world finally learned who he was. This story reminds us of the true cost of judging people before we know them. Victoria Sterling didn't lose her peace because she made a mistake. She lost it because she decided who Samuel was before she ever gave him a chance to speak. Today, think about one person you've dismissed too quickly. A stranger, a coworker, a neighbor, or even someone in your own family. Maybe the next time you're tempted to make an assumption, remember Samuel Carter and choose one extra moment of patience instead. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 below. And here's a question for you. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be completely different from what you first assumed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And stay with me because the next story might make you look at people in a way you never have before.
This story reminds us of the true cost of judging people before we know them. Victoria Sterling didn't lose her peace because she made a mistake. She lost it because she decided to who Samuel was before she ever gave him a chance to speak. Today, think about one person you dismissed too quickly. A stranger, a coworker, a neighbor, or even someone in your own family. Maybe the next time you are tempted to make an assumption, remember Samuel Carter and choose one extra moment of patience instead. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 below. And here's a question for you. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be completely different from what you first assumed? I'd love to hear your story in the comment. And stay with me because the next story might make you look at people in a way you never had before.